We want to spend a little bit of time here with Patrick Parise, as I mentioned.
Go! Hey!
Patrick, it's a war zone in here.
Joe, that's a scene from Restrepo, a new documentary directed by Sebastian Junger and Tim Hetherington. It opens today in select cities, L.A. and New York first, and then it'll open a more wider release later. Basically, these two guys, beginning in May of 2007, the two filmmakers spent 14 months with a platoon of U.S. soldiers in the Korengal Valley of Afghanistan. Really, really fascinating movie. I had a chance to talk with them earlier today, Sebastian and also Major Dan Kearney, who's the leader of the platoon and featured prominently in the documentary.
So it's a doc that'll be in probably art-style theaters around the country, so in the bigger cities, I'm assuming?
Exactly. Like in Washington this week, it's premiering at a film festival called Silver Docs.
Yeah, cool.
But it'll be expanding later, and I really urge everyone to see this movie. I'll say just up front, this is an apolitical movie. This is really meant just to give you the perspective of what it's like to be a soldier in Afghanistan. And it's done from the camera lens of two guys who are veteran war correspondents who really have no agenda. You really feel like you're there because this is real. It's not a movie.
And especially poignant in this week where we're spending so much time talking about Afghanistan policy and probably a lot less time talking about the people who are living and dying there.
That's a really good point. And you'll hear in the interview later talking with Major Kearney when he talks about, what their main concern is, and that's basically keeping each other safe while they're there. So we started out actually by asking co-director Sebastian Junger to paint a picture for us by describing the Korengal Valley.
The Korengal Valley is 6 miles long. It's in the eastern part of the country along the Pakistan border in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Physically, it was beautiful. It looked a lot like Colorado. Big trees on the upper ridges, almost like redwoods, these sort of rushing rivers in the bottom of the valleys, very steep, rugged terrain. And it was very violent. Something like a fifth of all the combat in all of Afghanistan was taking place inside those 6 miles while I was there.
And you're a veteran war correspondent, so I'm guessing that you're kind of used, to some degree at least, to seeing combat.
Yeah, I've covered wars all over the world, starting in 1993 in Bosnia. I was in West Africa, Liberia, Sierra Leone. War is a lot of different things, and if you're reporting from the civilian population, what you're basically reporting on is social chaos. This was different. I was with the professional army, and they were fighting very intensely in the mountains. They were, very intense firefights. I'd never been in that kind of combat before. It was really a new experience for me.
Sebastian, what was it like for you being with the platoon for 14 months? I mean, seeing you guys before this interview, it seems like you have a lot of trust and camaraderie between you now. Was it like that initially, or did it take a bit of getting to know you before the guys in the platoon considered you to be part of the group?
Well, my partner, Tim Hetherington, and I did 5 one-month trips each, a total of 10 trips between the two of us, sometimes together, sometimes apart. The press and the military have a somewhat prickly relationship, not necessarily with the brass, but, with the soldiers themselves. And they were they were polite, but a little distant, a little mistrustful at first. After the first big firefight I was in, I shot video of them in combat, and I showed it to them, and they'd never seen themselves sort of in action before, and that began to establish a bond, I think. I just played it on my video camera, and so trip after trip, we got closer and closer. I think by the third trip, I'd torn my Achilles tendon and kind of crawled and limped around for a few weeks out there.
Dan's laughing now.
yeah. Tim broke his leg up on top of the Abasgar mountain after a pretty serious combat operation. He had to walk all night on a broken leg to get down off of there without, so as not to endanger anybody, get them stuck up there. And then I was in a Humvee that got blown up on my third trip, and we were all okay. But I think the guys realized that Tim and I were putting in we're paying our price as well. We were really committed to this story, and the story was their story. It wasn't, a political analysis of the war or broad strokes about Afghanistan, some kind of evaluation or judgment. It was like, what's it like to be a soldier in combat in a place like the Korengal? And when they understood that, they sort of became our partners in it. They became our friends and became really completely open in front of the camera, and even totally unaware of the camera. It was pretty extraordinary.
Some of the scenes, though, I mean, even just as someone viewing them and not having been there, it was pretty tough to watch that. I can't imagine what it was like to be there for that or to film some of those battle scenes, especially where people die. It's intense, to say the least. What's it like being a filmmaker in those situations? How do you stay in that mode? Is it just pure professionalism, or are you in some degree of shock, or how does that work?
For me, the camera was almost a kind of life jacket that I clung to in those situations. Once I was, and I think it's probably the same way for the soldiers with their weapons. Like if you're in combat and you don't have something to do, it's terrifying. And as soon as you have a responsibility, whether as a soldier to do whatever your job is, or as a filmmaker, okay, here's the camera. I'm going to try to capture this on film. As soon as you have a job to focus your mind, your fears are kind of sidelined. And the one time I was really, really scared in combat was I was separated from my camera, and I literally could not get to it. It was 10 feet away, and there was too many rounds coming in between me and it. I could not get to it. And that was the one time where I really just sort of like went into a kind of shock. But otherwise, it really was not that bad. There was bravery happening all around me, and it wasn't that hard to turn the camera on and try to record it.
We're talking with filmmaker Sebastian Younger and Dan Kearney, Major Kearney, I should say. Both Sebastian is the filmmaker, and Major Kearney is featured in the film Restrepo, which takes place in Afghanistan. And in light of recent events, I'd like to get your insight on this, if I can, Dan, in terms of General McChrystal's resignation, if you can offer any insight into, how that's playing out with the soldiers that are still in Afghanistan. What kind of thoughts maybe run through your mind, and what your reaction is to his resignation?
In all honesty, I think the soldiers, and myself included, are kind of focused so far down on the job at hand that it really doesn't matter who's in charge. As long as somebody that's a moral, upstanding citizen is in charge that we can look up to. And I think it's sad that General McChrystal had to step aside, but General Petraeus is coming in. I think everybody in the world knows his credentials and thinks highly of him, and that'll come in there and do a great job. But the men on the ground, they don't care about that. They care about the man who's to their left and right. As cliche as it sounds, they care about the brotherhood, the bond that's forged together under the blast furnace of combat that they go through daily. And the same goes for people like Sebastian and Tim when they were with us. I mean, those guys are now part of the Battle Hard family. I mean, they're our brothers. So if you go through that with somebody, that's kind of all you care about. You don't care about the guys up above. You don't care about whoever's sitting in Washington that's making those things. You're just doing your job, making sure that you survive, and making sure that you can do whatever it is you can do to make sure that the mission is a success. Because you don't want to go over there and have a failed venture after 15, 12 months over there.
Sebastian, what role would you like your film to play in the ongoing discussion about Afghanistan? What are your hopes?
We wanted to make a film that showed what it was like to be in combat. Soldiers are maybe the only people in this country who are not talking about the war in political terms. They're doing it. And I feel that, I don't think the experience of the soldier should form policy. That's not how policy is. That's not how policy happens. But I think for the population, it's a very, very important thing to understand what these guys went through. They're coming home. Whether at some point, whether you support the war or don't support the war, whether you're conservative or liberal, it doesn't matter. They are coming home to this country, and we have to work as hard as possible to make a place for them where they feel welcome. The consequences of failing to do that are terrible for them and for the country as a whole. And what I'm hoping is that when people go to see our movie, that they leave their politics in the lobby and they enter into that theater and they sit there and they try to understand on an experiential and emotional level what it was like for these guys, so that when they come back, there's the basis for a dialogue and some kind of understanding with them.
The film is Restrepo, and it opens in New York and Los Angeles today. And we've been visiting right now with co-director Sebastian Younger and Major Dan Kearney, who's featured in the film. I've enjoyed talking with you both. We're glad that we had the opportunity to do so, and thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It makes us proud when we see the news. They still call it Restrepo.
But when I hear Restrepo, I still think of the person.
Same time, same dope rhyme, because we're going to be still loving life and getting ready to go to war.